Time is naturally viewed as a circle, right? The circuits of the sun and the moon. It's really only through the biblical lens that we acquire rationally an understanding of linear timelines. Have the moral qualifications of society in the West improved? Well, no. 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 through 5, actually says that in the last days, you see my arrow going down there, we're going to see a decline. In a way, history is regressive. Here's another cycle that historians and other people have noticed. Even casual observers seem to go, yep, that's true. Coining a new term for you today, excessively nerdy perhaps. We will call it the leno-cyclical view of history. Hey guys, I want you to take 9 minutes today in this video to think deeply about, have I been deceived about my view of history and how history works? And if what you see in this video is true, what does this mean for the end of America? Enjoy the video, think deeply about this, and let me know what you think in the comments. Watch the full seminar, of course, at beltoftruth.tv. This brings up a philosophical question. When we think about the end of history, is there such a thing? Well, how do we view history? There's two competing views, and then within those two competing views, but the theory of history, cyclical or linear, progressive or regressive. Now, I know I'm getting kind of historically philosophical on you here, but this is going to play into cycles that indicate 2025. So I got to lay a foundation here with a little philosophy of history with you, so just stick with me on this. Throughout the last 200-300 years, Western thinking most definitely goes with the linear view. In fact, for longer than that. The linear view is that history progresses from a point to a point on a line. And typically it's viewed as progressive as well, as improving. You know, the 1400s, we had the Renaissance, and the 1500s, the Protestant Reformation, the 16 and 1700s, you have the Enlightenment and the Scientific Revolution and the Civic Revolutions, and then you get 1800s, you have Industrial Revolution, the 1900s, the American century, and you tend to have this optimistic view of history in the West. It's linear and progressive. Now, biblically, we should be careful not to overstate the social progress that has transpired over the centuries. Just think of the last 100 years. The last 200 years. Have the moral qualifications of society in the West improved? Have we seen an increase in Christlike godliness? Well, no. 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 through 5, actually says that in the last days, you see my arrow going down there, we're going to see a decline. In a way, history is regressive. What happened for 4,000 years before Christ's first coming? Since Adam and Eve fell, the degradation of the human race for 4,000 years. So the Bible does present a linear view, but it shows a regressive, not a progressive view. And then also, what the biblical worldview offers that the secular history worldview would not, is a beginning and an end. You had creation, and then the degradation of humankind, and then Christ's second coming. So it has a beginning, and it has a destination. And the destination is not universal liberal democracy, but this is missing something, isn't it? Some of you are probably thinking, this isn't quite the whole picture of redemptive history. Keyword, redemptive, because there is the redeemed. And they are growing to the stature and the measure of the fullness of Christ, and the wheat growing alongside the weeds unto maturity. So I'm going to propose that it's both regressive and progressive. Society is regressing, degrading, but those who will, if we will walk with Jesus Christ day by day, live and move and have our being in Him, then we will have that growth and progress. So these two diverging lines, the weeds in Matthew 13 in the parable becoming uglier and uglier and more destructive unto the final persecution and immorality and destruction of the last days, but God's people shining like stars in the universe. Now we asked also this question, cyclical or linear, and we were like, well, generally we view history on a timeline, do we not? So we tend toward that linear view, but let's not be so quick to dismiss the cyclical. Time is naturally viewed as a circle, right? The circuits of the sun and the moon. It's really only through the biblical lens that we acquire rationally an understanding of linear timelines and a progress and a regress in history. But students of the Bible have also noticed
This cycle, for example, in ancient Israel, pride and wickedness leads to destruction and suffering. Destruction and suffering is followed by humility and repentance, ideally, which then leads to righteousness and prosperity. But then many times with that prosperity, again comes pride and wickedness, and it cycles on through. Here's another cycle that historians and other people have noticed. Even casual observers seem to go, yep, that's true. Hard times make strong men. Strong men make good times. Good times make weak men. Weak men make hard times. Now, the picture you see associating these is Roman history. And Roman historians especially, after some period of time of their empire and studying their own history, they began to observe cycles that would cycle in 80 to 110-year periods of time. And those historians who noted that observed the cyclical changes and the events that would typically transpire and then made forecasts and were able to have predictive power from the cycles that went to what should be expected to come. At least two of them even gained reputation in their day of being prophets. Now we know this is not a sure word of prophecy, it's trends and tendencies, but this was a real thing and continues to be. In fact, you see cycles by the historian scholar Toynbee, who showed the war and peace cycle of Europe. Back to the 1400s, every century there have been periods of major intense wars followed by less war, and he noted and observed this and showed the cycles throughout those hundreds of years. They've averaged 95 years between the beginning of one cycle and the end and the beginning of the next cycle. Now, speaking of cycles, we've seen the one of Israel, the Roman one, the Toynbee European history one. There are others as well. There's Tytler's cycle of nations. This scholar noted that the history of an empire tends to go like this, from birth to death. Bondage. Now I'm going to add in parentheses the Israelite version of this, and you're going to go, yep, these cycles happen. So bondage, we were slaves in Egypt, right? From bondage to spiritual freedom, let my people go. Spiritual freedom to great courage, Caleb and Joshua being the men of courage for their time. From great courage to liberty, as well as liberty's corollary danger and temptation of being everyone doing what is right in their own eyes. That's not liberty, but slave to sin. But liberty can lead to abundance, milk and honey in the land of Canaan. Abundance to complacency. Certainly we've experienced that, have we not? And what does it say in Deuteronomy 8, verses 14 and verse 20? It says, if you, my people, God says, if you by any means forget the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. In other words, you become complacent. You don't remember to heed and take heed and to obey. You forget God. And you got the idea, my own hands have created for me this prosperity. He says, you know what's going to happen? Your nation will be overthrown like the Canaanite nations were overthrown. That's where the next one, from complacency to dependence. Here come the Assyrians. Here come the Babylonians. That's the cycle that Israel went through on a macro scale, but also on a micro scale. They wanted the dependency of a king to rule over us. Can you imagine saying that? We want a king to rule over us because the other nations do it that way. As absurd as it might sound, to conform is what we human beings tend to do in our fallen nature. God forbid we would do the same. So dependency, give us a king of 1 Samuel 8 is where they end. And what's another word for dependency? Its more extreme form, the logical conclusion of dependency is bondage. So then you cycle back to step 1 of 7. Pretty interesting. Oh, by the way, America. Where is America in this cycle, the Tytler cycle of nations? Well, we're certainly at complacency and even dependency now. And then the next thing, maybe Revelation 13. Give us something to rule over us and persecute the other and provide for our needs so that our sustenance is taken care of. No buy, no sell for those guys, though. Now, this question of cyclical or linear, you can say, well, that's kind of a trick question, isn't it, Scott? Because you just showed how history is linear, and then you showed how there are also cycles in history, and they're both most definitely true. So I want to propose to you a different way of viewing this. We already saw this graphic. What if we superimpose over that cycles that are cycling toward an end goal? It's not like the Eastern view of everything is a yin and a yang and a cycle perpetually and reincarnation. That's not what I mean by cycles. We're talking about trends and tendencies that tend to repeat over time on the historical timeline that we get biblically and that we get from just observing history, that we are going somewhere. So coining a new term for you today, excessively nerdy perhaps, but we will call it the leno-cyclical view of history that I think is profoundly biblical and helpful to not only understand history, but to, again, be able to have some understanding of what may come next.